You can't manage that kind of money by yourself, Dad. You're still grieving. Just sign this, and let us handle everything. My son slid the document across my kitchen table like he was doing me a favor. His wife sat beside him, nodding along, her hands folded the way people fold hands at funerals. I looked at that paper. Then I looked at my son's face, steady, certain, already counting what wasn't his. I almost felt sorry for what was waiting inside my home safe. Before we get into that, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I spent 31 years at Heartland Federal Bank in Nashville. Started as a teller at 22. Moved into loan processing. Eventually ran the commercial lending division for my last 14 years. I reviewed thousands of documents in that building. Promissory notes, deed of trusts, power of attorney filings, beneficiary designations. I learned to read paper the way some people read faces, slow, careful, looking for what wasn't said as much as what was. When I retired at 63, my colleagues threw a party in the second-floor conference room. My wife came. She wore the blue dress I'd always loved on her. 8 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer moves fast. That's the one thing they tell you, and you still aren't ready for it. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the condolence cards tapered off, I was left with a quiet house in Brentwood and a life insurance policy my wife and I had kept current for 27 years. The death benefit was $180,000. I hadn't touched it yet. The check was sitting in a savings account I'd opened specifically for it, untouched, while I figured out what came next, what I wanted, who I was without her. My son lived 40 minutes away in Franklin with his wife and their 2 kids. He called more after the funeral than he had in the previous 2 years combined. I noticed that. I'm a loan officer. Noticing patterns is what I did for 3 decades. Still, he was my son. And grief makes you want family nearby. So I didn't examine it too closely. Not at first. The visits started casually. Sunday dinners. He'd bring the grandchildren, which I appreciated genuinely. We'd eat, watch football. They'd leave by 7. Then the conversations began shifting. Small comments at first. Dad, are you keeping track of all your accounts? It's a lot to manage alone. Or, have you thought about consolidating things? It might be easier for everyone. Everyone. I noticed that word too. One Sunday in February, about 6 months after my wife passed, my son came alone. No grandchildren, no his wife at first. He sat across from me at the same kitchen table where I'd signed mortgage applications, where my wife and I had paid bills together every first of the month for 22 years. He set a manila folder in front of him and didn't open it right away. He talked about the weather. He talked about his job. Then he talked about me. I've been worried about you, Dad. You're up here alone. You've got significant assets. And frankly, I just don't think you need the stress of managing all of it by yourself. Not right now. He tapped the folder. I had our attorney draw something up. A financial power of attorney. It just lets me help coordinate things. Pay bills if you're ever under the weather. Make sure nothing slips through the cracks. I kept my expression neutral. We already have one of those. That one expired. I checked. He opened the folder, turned it to face me. Sure enough, a fresh document. My name, his name, broad language granting him authority over bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the ability to redirect incoming funds on my behalf. Incoming funds. The $180,000 sitting in that savings account. It's just paperwork, Dad. For your protection. His wife arrived 20 minutes later. I hadn't heard her car. She must have parked down the street. She came in carrying a dish she said she'd made, set it on the counter, kissed my cheek, and sat down next to my son. United front. Rehearsed. This had been discussed before they walked through my door. We just want to help, she said. I looked at my son's face. Confident, certain I'd comply. He had reason to feel confident I was 64, recently widowed, and in his mind, the old man who still mailed paper checks and kept a paper calendar on the refrigerator. What he didn't account for was 31 years of reviewing documents exactly like the one sitting in front of me. Let me read through it, I said. Of course. He relaxed slightly. People relax when they think they've won. I read every line. The language was broad enough to give my son control over virtually every financial decision I could make. Redirecting direct deposits, accessing safe deposit boxes, managing insurance proceeds. I set the folder down on the table and folded my hands. I need to think about it, I said. That was the first lie I told him. I didn't need to think about it at all. I needed him to leave so I could make a phone call. After they were gone, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the folder he'd deliberately left behind. Then I walked down the hall to the small office off the main bedroom. In the closet, behind my hanging dress shirts, sat the fireproof home safe my wife and I had bought in 2009, after a neighbor's house flooded, and they lost every important document they owned. 4 digits on the combination. Her birthday. Nobody else knew it. I opened it and pulled out a manila envelope I'd placed there 4 months earlier, before the casseroles stopped coming, before the pattern of Sunday visits had started. My wife was still alive when I'd made the appointment, but she was already very sick, and I'd had time to sit with certain possibilities. After 31 years in banking, I knew what a power of attorney could do in the wrong hands. I'd seen it. Estate disputes, family members draining accounts before the ink dried on a death certificate. I'd flagged those situations for years. I knew exactly how it worked. 4 months ago, I'd driven downtown to meet with an estate attorney. I explained my situation clearly and without emotion. My wife was terminal. We had a prior POA on file naming my son. I wanted it revoked and replaced with a document naming my former colleague at Heartland Federal, a woman I'd worked beside for 19 years and trusted completely as my sole financial agent. We'd drawn up the revocation, filed it with the county, and sent certified notifications to every financial institution where I held accounts. I had the signed receipts in that envelope. I also had the new POA, the updated beneficiary designations on my life insurance and retirement accounts, and a letter already sent to the insurance company specifying that the $180,000 death benefit could only be dispersed directly to my personal savings account, requiring my in-person signature for any transfer exceeding $500. I held the envelope for a moment, then placed it back in the safe and closed it. The document my son had left on the kitchen table was worthless. He just didn't know it yet. I let 3 days pass. He called once, casual, asking if I'd had a chance to review the paperwork. I told him I was still thinking. He said there was no rush, his voice doing the careful work of someone pretending not to be in a hurry. On the 4th day, I called my attorney. He presented a new POA, I told her. Broad language. Control over incoming funds. The revocation is already on file everywhere, she said. He can't execute anything with a new document unless you sign it and it's notarized and filed. Even then, the institutions have your standing instructions. I know. I want to be ahead of whatever comes next. There was a pause. What do you think comes next? I think he's going to try the insurance company directly. Call and claim authority. Then when that doesn't work, I think he's going to suggest I'm not capable of managing my own finances. Another pause. You've thought about this carefully. I've had time. We met that Friday afternoon. I brought my medical records from the previous year, full physical, blood work, cognitive screening my doctor had run as part of a standard senior wellness check. Everything clean. Better than clean. The neurologist's note said my processing speed and executive function were in the top percentile for my age group. I also brought 31 years of employment records, my professional licenses, and a folder of recent financial decisions I'd made, investment reallocations, a refinance I'd completed 6 months before retirement, tax returns for the last 5 years, documentation that told a clear, consistent story of a man in complete command of his affairs. My attorney reviewed everything and smiled slightly. You came prepared. Habit, I said. She drafted a preemptive letter to be sent to my son's home address via certified mail. It stated simply that the prior POA had been revoked, that a new one was in place naming a different agent, and that any attempt to represent himself as my financial proxy to any institution would constitute fraud under Tennessee law. She also drafted a letter to the insurance company confirming my standing instructions. We sent everything that afternoon. My son called the next morning at 7:48. I was drinking coffee. Dad. His voice was flat in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. What is this letter? Which part is unclear? You revoked the POA months ago? Without telling me? I wasn't required to tell you. It's my POA. Dad. His voice shifted. The caregiving tone was gone. That $180,000, that's money. Mom would have wanted to stay in the family. You're not thinking straight. You're still grieving. I set my coffee cup down on the counter. The same counter where his wife had set her casserole dish 2 weeks ago. I'm thinking very clearly. I've been thinking clearly my entire adult life. That's not going to change because you're inconvenienced. We're trying to help you. You're trying to access my bank accounts. There's a difference. The line went quiet for 3 seconds. We'll talk about this in person. There's nothing to talk about. He came anyway, 2 days later. His wife stayed in the car this time. He stood in my living room and spoke for 15 minutes about his concern for my well-being, my isolation, my grief affecting my judgment, my age. I let him finish. I didn't interrupt. When he was done, I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer beside the refrigerator, and handed him a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of the certified mail receipt, his signature confirming delivery of my attorney's letter. The date was stamped clearly. He'd signed for it himself. I received that, he said, confused. That's your signature, acknowledging receipt of the POA revocation and legal notice. Keep it. You'll need it to show your attorney when they explain to you what it means. He stared at the paper. Something moved across his face. Something between anger and recalculation. You're making a mistake, he said. You're standing in my house, I said. I think we both know who made the first mistake. He left without another word. His wife backed out of the driveway without either of them looking toward the house. I stood at the window and watched them go. Then I went back to the kitchen and poured a second cup of coffee. I'd expected the next move to be legal, and I was right. The petition arrived by certified mail 11 days later. My son and daughter-in-law, through their attorney, were filing for a determination of incapacity. Grounds. My wife's recent death had destabilized my emotional state. My decision to revoke the POA was impulsive and inconsistent with prior behavior. My refusal to accept family assistance indicated cognitive decline, and my management of a large insurance settlement was placing me at financial risk. I read the petition twice at the kitchen table. Then I called my attorney. They're moving fast, she said. They need to move before the insurance payout processes fully. They know the instructions I filed narrow their window. They'll request a court-appointed psychiatric evaluation. You'll need to cooperate with that. I know. I also have something they don't. I told her about the folder I'd prepared 4 months ago. The cognitive screening, the employment records, the financial history. She was quiet for a moment. Why, this is… Frank, I said. My name is Frank. Right. Frank. I could hear her thinking. This is remarkably thorough preparation for something you hoped wouldn't happen. 31 years in commercial lending. We called it due diligence. The psychiatric evaluation was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Court calendar. Routine delays. In the meantime, my son tried one more approach. He drove to Heartland Federal, my old bank, and asked to speak with someone about my accounts. He introduced himself as my son and implied he had authority to make inquiries. What he didn't know was that I'd called the branch manager the same week I revoked the POA. My former colleague there had placed a notation on every account. No third-party inquiries without written authorization. Confirmed in person by the account holder. The branch manager called me that same afternoon. Your son came in today, she said. We turned him away. Thought you should know. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate it. Frank, is everything okay? It's handled, I said. But I want to document this visit. Can you email me the date, time, and what was said? She sent it within the hour. I forwarded it to my attorney. The psychiatric evaluation happened on a Thursday morning. Dr. Raymond Cole, court-appointed, worked out of an office in Green Hills. He had the careful, unhurried manner of someone who'd seen every version of family conflict wearing the costume of medical concern. We spent 90 minutes together. He asked about my career, my wife's illness, the timeline of my financial decisions, my relationship with my son, my daily routine since retirement. I answered every question directly. No performance, no self-pity. Just facts delivered in the same tone I'd used in 31 years of loan committee meetings. He tested my memory, gave me 3 objects to recall, had me count down from 100 by sevens, asked me to draw a clock, to name current events, to explain a hypothetical financial decision and walk through my reasoning. I recalled the 3 objects without hesitation. The clock was accurate to the minute hand. I named 3 recent news items I'd read that morning. The financial hypothetical I walked through with the same methodology I'd used on commercial loan applications for 14 years. At the end, Dr. Cole closed his notepad. Mr. Dolan, I'm not able to share my conclusions directly, but I'll tell you this much. The clinical picture here is not what the petitioning party described. No, I said. I didn't think it would be. My attorney called me the following Tuesday. Cole's report came in. Full competency. He noted the petition appeared inconsistent with any observable evidence of cognitive impairment. He used the phrase, no clinical basis, 3 times. She paused. Their attorney called me this morning. They want to discuss settlement. What are they proposing? They'll withdraw the petition. In exchange, they want you to restore your son as beneficiary on the insurance policy and add him to the savings account. I was standing at my back window, looking at the yard. My wife had planted a row of knockout roses along the back fence. They'd come back on their own this spring, the way they always did. No, I said. I told them you'd likely say that. What's the hearing date? 3 weeks. File our response. The hearing lasted 55 minutes. My attorney presented Dr. Cole's report, my complete financial records going back 15 years, the cognitive screening from my annual physical, character statements from 2 former colleagues at Heartland Federal, and the documented evidence of my son's attempt to access my accounts using a revoked authority. His attorney argued emotional distress and isolation as grounds for diminished capacity. The judge, a man in his late 50s who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the look of someone with no patience for cases that wasted his calendar, stopped the opposing attorney midway through a sentence. Counselor, you have a petition for incapacity filed against a man who, by your own timeline, simultaneously retained an estate attorney, drafted and filed a POA revocation, coordinated with multiple financial institutions, and prepared a comprehensive evidence file, all while you claim he was too impaired to manage his affairs. He set his glasses down. Do you see the problem with that argument? Your Honor, the behavior itself was erratic. The revocation was done without family notification. He wasn't required to notify anyone. It's his power of attorney. The judge looked at the papers in front of him. Petition denied. Court finds no basis for a determination of incapacity. I'll also note for the record that the evidence suggests this petition was filed in response to the respondent's lawful financial decisions, not in genuine concern for his well-being. The gavel came down once. Clean. Final. I walked out of the courthouse with my attorney. My son and his wife were at the other end of the hallway. He looked at me once, then away. His wife stared at the floor. Their attorney was already on his phone. On the courthouse steps, my attorney turned to me. It's over. You're on record as fully competent. The petition is dismissed. The POA revocation stands. Everything you filed with the financial institutions stands. Yes. She looked at me carefully. How do you feel? I looked at the parking lot. A normal Tuesday morning. People going about their lives, like I want to go home and figure out what comes next. She nodded. Call if you need anything. I drove home alone. The house felt different when I walked in. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, then in the living room, then in the doorway of the small office down the hall. 22 years of our life in these rooms. The place my wife and I had argued about paint colors and laughed about the neighbor's dog and sat together every Sunday morning with coffee before the rest of the world woke up. The place my son had walked into with a folder and a plan. I went to the office, opened the safe, and took out the envelope. I spread the documents across the desk. The POA revocation, with its certified mail receipts, the updated beneficiary forms, the insurance instructions, everything I'd prepared when she was still alive, and I was sitting with hard possibilities and deciding quietly how I would protect what we'd built. I sat there for a long time. My son called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the next morning. I let that go too. On the third day, he sent a text. It said, "I hope you're proud of yourself. You won. That's all you care about." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "I didn't want to win. I wanted to be treated like a person. You chose not to do that." I didn't send a second message. I set the phone down and called my realtor. I'd been thinking about selling the house since January. The thought had arrived quietly, without drama, not as escape, but as acknowledgement. The house was 4 bedrooms for one person, 22 years of memories that were becoming heavier than comforting. The mortgage was paid. The property had appreciated significantly since we'd bought it. And in the months I'd spent sitting with my situation, I'd done what I always did when facing a major decision. Research. Spreadsheets. Comparisons. I'd been looking at a small town in East Tennessee, in the foothills of the Smokies, where a 2-bedroom cabin on 2 acres was listed at $195,000. Wood stove in the living room, a creek running along the property line, a covered porch facing east. The realtor put the Brentwood house on the market on a Thursday. By the following Monday, I had 4 offers. I accepted the strongest, all cash. Quick close at $387,000. My son found out when the for sale sign went up. He called 8 times in one afternoon. I answered the 8th. "You're selling the house." His voice had the sound of someone who'd just understood something they'd been refusing to see. "Yes." "Where are you going?" "Somewhere quieter." "Dad." A long pause. "We were wrong. About the POA. About all of it. Okay? We were wrong. But you can't just, this is the house you raised me in. This is where Mom—" "I know what this house is," I said. "I also know what happened in it. So that's it? You're done with us?" I looked out the window at the front yard. The realtor's sign had a bright red under contract rider on it already. "I'm done with being managed." "That's different." He didn't say anything. "You have children," I said. 2 of them. They're going to grow up and make decisions you don't understand, and spend money you didn't expect them to spend, and live lives that look different from what you imagined. When that happens, I hope you remember this year. I hope you remember what it felt like to have someone decide that your judgment couldn't be trusted." He hung up. I put the phone in my pocket and went to start packing. The closing happened on a Friday. I signed the final papers in a conference room at a title company in Cool Springs, the same part of town where my son had his office. I didn't look for his car in the parking lot. I accepted the wire transfer confirmation, thanked the closing agent, and walked out into an ordinary April afternoon. Tennessee spring. Everything green. The air smelling like it had plans. I drove home and finished loading the last of what I was taking. Not much. Some furniture, my books, my wife's rose-cutting tools that I couldn't leave behind. Everything else I donated or sold. The house was clean, emptied, ready for the next family. I stood in the kitchen one last time, the window above the sink where my wife used to stand and watch the yard while the coffee brewed. The table where 30 years of decisions had been made. Some good, some not. All of them ours. I picked up my keys and walked out. The drive to Sevierville took a little over 3 hours. I'd made it twice already during the buying process, learned the route, knew where the good gas stations were and where the road narrowed through the mountain pass. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel driveway, half a mile off the county road, surrounded by second-growth hardwoods that were just coming into leaf. The creek made a constant low sound, like the house was breathing. I parked and sat in the car for a moment. Then, I got out, walked up the porch steps, and unlocked the front door with the new key the seller had given me at closing. Inside, the rooms were small and smelled like wood and cold stone. The morning light came through windows that faced the mountains. I set my box of books down on the kitchen floor and stood there, looking at nothing in particular, listening to the creek. My phone had 12 missed calls and 7 text messages. I turned it over in my hand, looked at the screen, then set it face down on the kitchen counter. I'd read everything later. Or I wouldn't. That was the thing about starting over. You got to decide what to carry forward and what to leave on the side of the road. I'd carried forward my documents and my careful habits and 31 years of knowing how to read the fine print. I'd left behind a house full of someone else's assumptions about who I was. The safe was in a box in the back of my car. I'd bring it in later, find a good place for it. My attorney had the copies of everything. The insurance funds were in an account in my name only. My retirement accounts were untouched, well managed, mine. Everything in order, the way it always had been. I found a mug in one of the kitchen boxes and filled it with water from the tap. Sat down on the porch steps. The mountains were still holding a little winter at their tops, white patches against the blue. The creek turned over the stones at the property's edge. Unhurried. Somewhere on the drive up, I'd made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Just a quiet settling into what was true. I was 64 years old. I had enough money to live on my own terms for the rest of my life. I had my health. I had the work of 31 years sitting like a foundation underneath everything. And I had this. 2 acres, a covered porch, an east-facing window, and not a single document on this property that had anyone else's name on it but mine. I'd fought because I had to. I'd documented because it was the right thing to do. I'd won because I'd prepared before anyone had thought there was a fight coming. And now, the fight was over. The afternoon light moved across the porch. I stayed where I was and let it. I'd told my son I wasn't done with them. That wasn't quite accurate. I was done with the version of the relationship where I existed as an asset to be managed. What came after this, if anything came that was up to him? The door wasn't welded shut, but it opened from the inside now. I finished my water, went back into the cabin, started unpacking. There's something clarifying about putting your belongings into a new space. Each object has to earn its place. The things you keep on purpose. My wife's rose tools went on a shelf by the kitchen window where I'd see them every morning. Her photograph, the one from our last vacation, her standing in front of the Smoky Mountains with her hand shielding her eyes from the sun, laughing at something I'd said, went on the windowsill in the living room. The view out that window was the same range of mountains. I noticed that and let myself feel it without trying to name it. By evening, the main rooms were livable. I made dinner from what I'd brought in a cooler, ate on the porch in the last of the light. The creek was louder in the evening. The tree frogs started up as the dark came in. I thought about the pension arriving every month, steady as it had always been. The insurance funds sitting quiet and intact. The legal proceedings closed, documented, finished. I thought about my son sitting somewhere in Franklin, recalculating. And then, because the creek was loud and the air was cool, and there was nothing left that required my immediate attention, I stopped thinking about it. There were trails near the cabin. I'd check them on a map. I'd buy a good pair of boots this week, walk one of them, see what was out there. I had no plan beyond that, and for the first time in 31 years, no plan felt exactly right. The stars came out over the mountains, one at a time at first, then all at once, the way they always do when you get far enough from the city lights. I stayed on the porch until it was fully dark. Then I went inside, locked the door, and slept better than I had in 8 months. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And to hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for watching.